Welcome everyone to the opening lecture for the spring semester organized by the Master's Program of Global Politics and Trans-Pacific Studies. We thank you for being here, all the students that are joining this call, and also the students and the audience that is viewing this and watching this presentation through Facebook and other social media. Thank you for being here. And today we are honored to have a very special guest in our university. She's a friend actually of the University of Guadalajara. She made a visit, an academic visit 4 years ago as a Fulbright specialist. She taught seminars and delivered some lectures also in the University of Guadalajara to the students of international relations. And we are very happy to have again Clare Seelke, an expert of the U.S. Congress, and that's why we are honored and happy to have this such an special guest for us. Well, before I pass the floor to Clare, I would like to just mention some highlights of her career. She's been working as a nonpartisan expert in the National Congress for 14 years. The topics she works on are related to Latin American relations and US and Mexico relations, particularly regarding security issues and political developments in Mexico and Central America. Today, we are, as she said yesterday, we are in the perfect timing to have this kind of lecture, because during this week, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and Joe Biden met for the first time in their first official meeting. And also, more than that, the developments and the events that are going on in the bilateral relations are very controversial, polemical, and I think the environment in the region is perfect to discuss topics about U.S.-Mexico relationship. Well, thank you very much, Clare, for being here. Welcome to the University of Guadalajara. I am going to handle your presentation. Don't worry about it. You let me know when I go ahead. And welcome. The floor is completely yours. After the presentation, we are going to open a Q&A session. We can interact and discuss some ideas or anything you would like to comment to our special guest. Clare, welcome to Guadalajara again.
Thank you. It's great to be here today, and I'm excited. I'm actually trying to write something for the U.S. Congress about U.S.-Mexican relations, starting at the beginning of the Biden administration. So while Miguel kind of sets up the PowerPoint, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me, and just maybe tell you a little bit about myself and the CRS. CRS is supposed to be nonpartisan, so we have to be careful about what we say, and especially on issues that are sort of controversial, maybe in the U.S. domestically, like more like immigration, things like that. So I cover actually like how does Mexico react to what's going on in the United States, and so it's not as controversial, but now is a delicate time in the relationship, I would say. Do you have the slides, Miguel? Or I can't see them. So, oh, I see them. Okay. Cool. Okay. So, okay, go ahead. If you want to keep going. Okay, today I'm just going to talk a little bit about what CRS is. You may have heard of it, you may not have heard of it. And then I'll talk a little bit about how US-Mexican relations have evolved, mostly the presidential relationship, but also congressional, and how the Trump administration was sort of an aberration from the norm. But actually relations between the Trump administration and the López Obrador administration were surprisingly positive, so that's interesting. And then talk a little bit about what I think some key issues might be moving forward in the 117th Congress. So we call it every 2 years as a new Congress. And so this Congress just started and it'll be there for 2 years. And as you know, the US House is controlled narrowly by the Democrats and the Senate is 50-50. So it's very interesting that one senator has a ton of power right now. And I'm actually living in West Virginia, where one man can basically stop anything he wants. And it's very interesting time. So you can go ahead to the next slide. This is really slow. It'll take a bit. But basically, CRS has been around for more than 100 years. And we are meant to be an agency that works just for the legislative branch. We do research and analysis on, there's about 650 people. There's a lot of people right now. We've hired up finally after not having a full staff for many, many years. We have research librarians, and then we have subject experts. Many of them have PhDs. I do not, but most of the people who work in my division, which is the Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Trade Division, speak the languages of the countries they cover, you know, Mandarin if it's China, you know, they speak Arabic and different things. So it's a really neat part of the CRS to be in. We're physically located in the Library of Congress, although a lot of us are teleworking, given the COVID and the security issues that happened almost 2 months ago that were just really awful. Our sister agencies are the Government Accountability Office, which sort of audits government programs and makes sure there's not waste or fraud or abuse, and the Congressional Budget Office, which provides their own estimates to the Congress about how much a particular program will cost or what might be the negative things of doing different moves. You want to go to the next slide? So CRS is supposed to be nonpartisan and objective, and unlike the GAO, we help the Congress as they do their day-to-day, business. Like if they're going to have a meeting with a president of a country, they may ask us for a confidential memo about what they should ask. Or today, for example, there was a hearing on Venezuela, and I actually cover Venezuela and Mexico, which is crazy. But I had to do a hearing memo about the humanitarian situation in Venezuela, the political crisis, and what do we do now, and the national security issues that emanate from Venezuela. So that was just kind of one example of what we do is hearing memorandums. Those do not come out into the press. They're confidential. Sometimes we're asked to actually testify before the Congress. So that's a real honor when someone is asked to give their expert opinion. But it's hard because we're not really supposed to criticize or take positions too much, so that can be very tricky for a CRS analyst. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so just in case you were wondering, like what reports are out there about that have a nexus to Mexico, this doesn't even count our domestic issue. Like we have people who are lawyers who write on whether or not a lot of the things that President Trump did in the immigration field were even legal. So there is a ton of, reports on the migration protection protocols and different asylum limitations that President Trump implemented. And so that's not included here. But really you can see USMCA is actually what we call the TEMEC, that's the free trade agreement. We have maybe 15 reports just on different parts of that. It's a big interest of Congress. And then the other ones, they may seem strange if you're from Mexico City, but if you're from Texas, the Rio Bravo, Rio Grande, if you're from San Diego, the sewage from Tijuana, the lack of, is it alcantarillado? I don't know, the sanitation facilities along the border. Some of the issues are on human rights issues, on the freedom of the press, and I did something about enforced disappearances in Mexico and what the government's trying to do to find the disappeared. I'm thinking because of the change in Congress, maybe writing about climate change in Mexico, energy reforms, and whether or not López Obrador is trying to roll them back, what's going to happen. I think that might be an issue of conflict with the Congress, and then corruption and anti-corruption efforts, because that seems to be something of interest to President Biden and his team. We can actually come up with our own reports. We don't have to wait for Congress to tell us to do something, but we don't usually do it unless it's a big issue in the relationship. Really, right now, we kind of are updating a lot of these, not coming out with new things unless a lot of people start asking about a new topic. Okay, next slide. Okay, keep going. All right, so I think it's really interesting. I didn't realize that, I think since President Reagan, definitely President Bush, the first trip for US presidents, it might even be before that. I mean, you all know the history a lot better than I do, but you know, US presidents usually do meet with Canada and Mexico. Usually the Mexican president, the meeting is before they're even inaugurated. And so it's usually shown how important the bilateral relationship is. Now, President Trump went to Saudi Arabia. The trade relationship between the two countries intensified, obviously, after NAFTA. I was interested in learning how close the two countries came to a bilateral migration accord in 2001. If we hadn't been attacked on September 11th, you might have seen the Bush administration achieve with the Fox administration a huge breakthrough in U.S.-Mexico migration issues. That almost happened. And then finally, since I've been at CRS, which is a while, I've been there since 2003, security cooperation until like a few months ago was getting more positive under the Merida Initiative, where, anyway, I'll talk about that later. In the legislature, the parliaments have actually been meeting since the 60s, more than 50 years. It used to be annually, every other year in Mexico, United States. And we went in San Diego in October before the pandemic. And then the leader of Morena, Mario Delgado, invited the US Congress to come to San Miguel de Allende, but that might be a while. That might not happen for a while. So instead, in 2020, they actually held a Zoom like this, a virtual IPG, which I think makes sense because it's cheaper, it's quicker, and you can stay in touch. You can do it more frequently. I don't know if they've kept on doing that, but they did hold at least one related to TMEC, related to talking about TMEC. Next slide. So this is kind of funny that I'm talking about this right now when we've had a lot of stress with the DEA and everything, but there was limited cooperation, actually, because a DEA agent was killed in Mexico in 1985, I think. And then there was mistrust on both sides that the US was seen as intervening too much in Mexico. And I think the US was concerned about corruption in Mexico. But, you know, when President Calderon approached President Bush and asked for, cooperation and equipment in training to combat the drug cartels in 2007, that was a big step. And it was a big step, I think, also for the US to admit that there was a shared responsibility because the United States has drug demand, the gun trafficking, weapons trafficking, and money laundering, which is our fault, right? And that's what fuels a lot of the crime that takes place in Mexico. Since that time, the US Congress gave about $3 billion. But when you think about how big Mexico is and that Mexico spends at least 10 billion a year, 11 billion, 12 billion a year on security, it's actually not that much over that period of time. Some of the advances that the State Department would talk about would be especially like that they shared intelligence, that there was extraditions, seizures have gone up. If you go to the next slide. So under the Obama administration, the Merida Initiative had kind of ballooned out to focus on everything from like violence prevention in cities to drug demand programs to help Mexicans get off drugs if they were addicted, to institution building and the judicial reform in Mexico, your effort to have oral trials and things like that. It was really more focused on that. But when President Trump took office, he really wanted, I mean, I don't know if he even knew about the Merida Initiative, but the people that worked for him took it back to a focus on like, what is the US domestic, like what do we get out of it, right? And so they were really worried about drug trafficking, especially fentanyl, border security and migration enforcement. I was actually in Mexico when President Trump threatened to raise tariffs on all of your exports if you didn't stop Central American migration in 2019. So that became a big focus. And then kind of like going after the business model of the cartels by doing things like combating money laundering. Although number 3 is less, they did less in that area, I think. Next slide. Okay, so actually, like, this is really simplistic. I'm sorry, it's sort of an insult to the relationship, but U.S.-Mexican relations used to be very broad. They would focus on everything from innovation and education partnerships to energy issues to health cooperation, all kinds of stuff. And it kind of came down to, I'm not going to bother you, President Trump, I'm not going to bother Lopez Obrador and criticize his internal, what he does in Mexico, he does, and you're not going to criticize, like, the U.S. State Department's not going to bother me too much about human rights issues or that kind of thing. So in my view, what happened was they actually got along pretty well, because as long as Mexico was willing to do migration control, and for the Congress willing to do labor reforms that Lopez Obrador probably backed anyway, because he had given wage increases. The minimum wage had risen in Mexico at least 2 or 3 times, and then to improve labor conditions. That got the Congress to support this TMEC, and so that's basically what they wanted. But in October, you all were just probably as surprised as I was, that when former General Cienfuegos, Defense Minister Cienfuegos, came to Los Angeles, he was arrested, and it turned out the DEA had been doing all this, investigation of him and not sharing that with anybody in Mexico. And I don't think they shared it with the U.S. Defense Department, because Cienfuegos had won an award in 2018 from our Pentagon for being an awesome collaborator and security cooperation person. So I mean, it's really weird. And then was even weirder was that the U.S. released him in November because Mexico was so angry. And then, I was reading articles, oh, this is a test for the Mexican justice system. Are they going to hold this person accountable? Well, no. From a U.S. perspective, it was a little shocking to see him exonerated, and then to have the whole investigation put on Twitter. Was like, whoa. In addition, a lot of people in the Congress were calling me to ask about this new law regulating foreign agents in Mexico. Although I think it was watered down in its regulations, it seems less threatening. But I think the security relationship is definitely not good right now at all. Okay, and so that's kind of where you leave it. And it was weird because, you have Lopez Obrador, one of the last leaders to recognize Biden's victory, like offering asylum to Julian Assange, like pushing through this law that almost threatened the central bank's independence, and an energy reform that basically gets rid of private renewable energy, like makes it more difficult for those companies to do business, and favoring the electricity company or whatever. I don't really cover energy, but it seems like that's going to be potentially a concern for the U.S. Congress too. So why don't you go to the next slide? Okay, so there we go at some issues, and I kind of hinted at them, but this was from a fact sheet. I could have actually linked to what they said, the 2 presidents, on, I guess, Monday. They agreed to, this is the U.S. side, right? This is what the U.S. had put out. In the end, like, they committed to doing number 2, number 3, some of number 1, maybe discuss number 5, and they affirmed that it's important to collaborate on security, but that's it. Like, reaffirmed that it's important, but they didn't commit to do much on that. And so, next slide. So I will say that the COVID-19 health and economic recovery, this is an actual State Department, thing that they put out, closing the border, and it's been closed since March of 2020. And so there were a lot of issues at the beginning between, like, the 2 countries over what should be allowed and shouldn't be allowed, and what industries are deemed essential for the United States, and how can you make sure that the supply chains that have developed through the NAFTA time period stay open. But I think this has inadvertently, the Trump administration, and even now the Biden administration, is using this to stop all immigrants, most immigrants from coming, and there's not much asylum processing. And so it's called Title 42, which is the CDC has this health thing that you can close ports of entry if there's a infectious disease. And so hundreds of thousands of people have been turned away because of that. So I think it's going to be a real issue to how they open up the border, when do they do it, and that kind of thing in the coming months. Whether they collaborate on vaccines, I don't think the U.S. will probably give up vaccines until they really are having a surplus, which could be a while. How do you use the free trade agreement to really boost economic recovery in both countries? Next slide. This is where we stand kind of as of earlier this week. Both countries have really suffered in terms of deaths and in terms of economic setbacks. I would say that, I don't know what to say, really, it's awful. And the progress is uneven in both countries. You can read my writing. This is my interpretation. I'm sorry if I'm wrong on Mexico. I think, the U.S. still has a lot of problems with wanting to open up fully too soon in some states, and the states all varying, and people not obeying the mask mandates, and how you balance, the need to create jobs again and restart the economy, school reopenings, and all of this. So it's hard. I think Mexico, I read an article by Ana Paula Ordonica, I think she wrote about 20 million children in Mexico. There is no Zoom class for them. There's no like high-speed internet. Like my kids have been in the back. If they start yelling, I'm sorry. But they've been on the internet, and it's not perfect, but it's something, But there's some kids throughout Latin America, maybe 100 million in Latin America, that don't have access to any class. So the rich keep going to private school, probably in person, if not on a really good Zoom platform, and they keep moving ahead. And the poor or middle class, lower middle class are like, So anyway, I think this is really something that we need to work together on, because it's pretty devastating. Next slide. All right, this is really complicated, and I don't want to burden you with this, but I think it's interesting that Mexico could stand to benefit if the Biden administration is able to give legal status and maybe even the path to citizenship for the Dreamers and for other Mexicans in the United States. I think that the hard thing is that the Congress is so divided that I don't think he'll get Republican support, much support for a broad immigration reform. So I think maybe the Dreamers will be fine. He's moved forward in the meantime on ending this program, migration protection protocols, and is going to eventually restart access to U.S. asylum, so that Mexico and Comar won't have to take all of these people who wanted to go to the United States now applying for asylum in Mexico. That was a lot. It's a big burden that you've had. You had, at one time, I think you had 60,000 people waiting for the migration protection protocols in northern Mexico. So it seems that President Lopez Obrador asked for some sort of bracero program. It may not look like that, but there definitely needs to be more guest worker programs for Mexicans and Central Americans. It's going to be complicated too, how to deal with your new law on migration, which, if you guys are not migration experts, it's kind of fascinating. The children's rights law now makes it so that not Mexican children, but actually Mexican children or children from other countries cannot be held in Mexican detention facilities that are made for adults. So that is why, apparently, Mexico has told the Biden administration, you have to stop sending us expelling children from other countries. And I think families too, forget it, we're not taking them. To me, it seemed like, whoa, Lopez Obrador is playing hardball. He's saying, forget it, I'm not taking them, but I did for Trump. And I was confused, but it's actually a new law in Mexico that is just going into effect. That's going to affect what they're able to do on the border as well. Go ahead to the next slide. All right, this is the really this is going to be like the yucky one, I think. One of the most difficult issues is to rebuild trust, to find out how the new regulations in Mexico will affect U.S. agencies there. To perceive, what does the government consider more of a threat? I actually read an article that, I think they were kidding, but they said that they thought that maybe the president and, well, at least some people in the Mexican government were worried about the DEA and their meddling as they were about the drug cartels. Now, I don't think that's true, but you do have a degree of kind of questioning, like, do you want to cooperate? What kinds of things would you support in the Iniciativa Merida? Is that muerto, or is that like, or do we need to start over? In the meantime, you have homicides in Mexico still going up, even in COVID. It was a record level last year. And we had record overdoses in the US. So what are we going to do? You know, like, what is your security strategy? What is our security strategy? What are we going to do about fentanyl and meth? Meth is also increasing in Mexico. And also, I think, and unfortunately for like people that don't like the US Congress and people that don't like the Democrats, you know, it's a problem for some people that we're giving money and the Mexican government is using the military so much in public security, even more than before. What's going to happen with the anti-corruption efforts in Mexico? What's going to happen to, like, if the US raises an issue with the government of Mexico, I don't know, will they be able to discuss it privately, or will it just be like, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to deal with you? Go to the next slide. And I think this is the thing, this is not what I cover. We actually have a Mexican-American economist who covers USMCA and then a whole team of people. But I think, you know, labor enforcement is a huge concern in the US. Like, I was once there in Mexico at your foreign ministry, and they had like a delegation of like 50 people, staffers, all to talk to your one man, like the minister of labor. Like, why do they have 50 staffers? But that's how much they you know, that's important to them. And then energy. If US companies start to complain that Mexico seems to be violating the trade agreement, what kind of dispute settlement mechanisms will they do, and how will that play out? I think that could get really interesting, especially after the new bill was passed today, I guess, or yesterday. Next slide. And it kind of, it's all this, like, it's like, from what I've been reading, like, what's going to go on with this. And you know, the president seems really popular, like 60% approval, 65% approval 2 years in, probably will win a majority in the keep the majority this in June in the elections. But, you know, I guess I didn't put human rights on here, but that's another thing, like human rights and women's rights. Like, there was a front page New York Times article today about, I think, the Morena candidate for governor in Guerrero. And, you know, it's just like, there's just like concern about human rights issues as well. Go to the next one. Yeah, so I'm happy to have a discussion. I know that this is from a very like US centric point of view. And so I'm happy to, if you disagree, I would love your comments or any questions that you can have about what I said.
No, it was excellent and very insightful. Thank you very much, Claire. And just now we're going to take questions from the students, from the audience. So if anyone wants to make a question, just raise your hand, and Lija and I are going to give you the floor. So just let us know. Maybe also, if one of our colleagues to make a question to Claire, please go ahead. Just, let us know. Well, Carolina Rafael here, Carolina Galindo. I'm gonna give her open her mic. And
hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you so much for being with us. So my question is more kind of personal. At the beginning of your presentation, you established that as a CRS member, you're expected to be neutral and not to have a preference to a political party or maybe an ideology. So is, how do you manage to keep your work well-centered and maybe sometimes truthful to stick to ideologies that may not consider to be the best positions or decisions? Do you believe you continue to be successful at your job because you stay true to the administration or to the US interests as a nation? Thank you.
That's a good question. I think it's, to be honest, like everything we do, everything we write, and this whole presentation went through a pretty rigorous review process. So they make sure that you're not sounding opinionated. I mean, if you're in a private setting, if you were like a staffer from some state and some senator, and we were talking informally, or if you were a member of Congress, I think we could talk a little bit more frankly. And once I got to know you, I mean, we try to be nonpartisan, but if a policy is causing, like sometimes, for example, it's all about how you write it. Like I think that the most important thing is to be loyal to the country. So like if you think that, if, for example, if we think that as observers and analysts, what we're reading, what, for example, we tried to write a report about what was happening in northern Mexico to people who were expelled because of this, Title 42 thing, like that closing the border. But then they said, you know what? They said, nope, sorry, it's too activist. You sound too much like human rights. And so we were sad because we were like, but we want to help the migrants, And so you can tell like my personal, like sometimes you can tell like what I might, like my personal, and that's not necessarily good in terms of being a CRS analyst, but I think it's not a bad thing to have to maybe question people or push people a little bit on what they're saying, because there's so many times when people just hear one perspective that once they come to trust us, then privately you can say, hey, I know you can't say this because your district is all 100% from, this perspective, right? But have you ever thought about that perspective, And sometimes even the members are like they're not gonna say it on TV, but they can see both sides of an issue. So that's cool. Like if you can, get them to see like both sides of something. But yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, a lot of people, like if you were very passionate about an issue, like let's say you're a passionate person who cares a lot about human rights or something, and then you had to write about that issue, but you could not like get your heart out of it and write about it from your head. It might be really hard for you to work where I do, because if you're just going to like cry, when you read about how bad these situations are, like, oh my gosh, then you won't be able to work, you won't be able to do it. And I don't know, to be honest with you, like there's some issues that are so divisive, like gun control. Like I couldn't write about gun control because I have no idea why we have guns. Like I'm so against it, and I couldn't speak with a member who's like, I have to have my 25 rifles. Like I just couldn't do that. So I think it's just a personal thing. And then also a skill you develop, like how to control like your own emotions and your own point of view, and then like kind of tone it down.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Claire. We also have another question from Cecilia Pinzon, who is in the iPhone Square. Are you still there, Cecilia? Lija, can you help us opening her mic? Or maybe Rafael? Lija,
okay,
can you?
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for the insightful presentation. I totally agree mostly with all the presentation, and mostly because of our current Mexican administration. So my question is, saying, because you can see the difference between the Biden administration and López Obrador administration, what do you think the possible implications in the future in terms of political and economic terms for Mexico? As you know, we have a populist president. That's the reality in Mexico. And there has been a lot of problems. Even a lot of people are speaking that Mexico can become the next Venezuela. What do you think about this? What do you, I mean, we saw that the United States had a Donald Trump, but your institutions are strong and they survive a populist president. But what about Mexico?
Well, I think it's hard to make comparisons, but and I don't know that every policy I know enough about to say which is right or wrong in Mexico. I mean, I think that it'll be a test. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the congressional elections, and to see whether if the majority is a little less in the Congress, you know, how the opposition parties, in some ways it's like the opposition parties need to present an alternative proposals, you know what I mean, alternative vision for the country, and maybe the governors too that are from other parties need to, you know, step up and say things that they believe too. And it may take, I mean, one thing Mexico does have is more active civil society than I've seen, you know, since I've covered it. And also the private sector is very, very influential. And so, you know, the thing is you only have 6 years in Mexico, and I don't think even, I don't think that you would be able to stop, you know, like to redo the Constitution so that he could run again. I mean, I think, yeah, our institutions were definitely tested to the limit, you know, and our country is really divided and pretty broken right now. So I don't know that we have a lot of, I think what we've learned in where I am is humility, that we don't really, I don't know what we can tell you about institutions except maybe the courts, but like it's, the US is broken too. And so I think we're broken and divided. And I think that it will be interesting. I think the one thing that makes me feel good about the Biden-Lopez Obrador relationship is that I think there are issues. I mean, nobody would have thought that Lopez Obrador would be in favor of CEMEC, right? Like, I wouldn't think that that would be something, but the private sector and the people that worked for him were able to kind of negotiate it and get him to go along, and then that became fine, you know? So maybe there are other issues where the private sector can lead, or also the US diplomats that are working for Biden that are handling issues related to Mexico are very experienced, you know, and he made the former ambassador that everybody loved. I don't know if you guys liked her, but Roberta Jacobson was very, very popular in Mexico. She's now in charge of border issues and kind of immigrate, like working with our DHS, Homeland Security, to handle like Mexico affairs. So, and a lot of the people that were there under Obama are back. And so I think they kind of know, like the meeting that they had with Lopez Obrador went pretty well. I mean, they didn't really push him on things, and President Biden talked about Our Lady of Guadalupe, you know, and like, just, I mean, it was lovely, right? You know, they did, but they knew they couldn't push on tough issues the first time. They have to kind of have a dialogue and an open dialogue. And I think you have a lot of professionals in your foreign ministry as well. And I think that, you know, I've always been very impressed by the Mexican diplomats that come through Washington, D.C. So hopefully things will be okay, you know, as we, because some of the things that President Lopez Obrador has endorsed in the past, Biden's actually for that. Like, let's invest in Central America. Let's, you know, have some access to asylum in Mexico and open it back up again in the US. Like, they're actually not that far apart on some issues.
Thank you, Claire. Now we're going to try again with Cecilia.
Hi, thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. I agree with all of it, and especially your point of view about most countries today are having a lot of problems. So you're saying that the US is a little broken. Yeah, I guess it's a little broken. But I wanted to ask you basically about the immigration question, because the idea that children cannot stay in adult detainee centers, how's that going to affect immigration in the US? What's Biden going to do about it?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's making it difficult. They had to reopen a child detention facility for unaccompanied children already. And I think that they are going to they're basically going back to releasing people. And there are ways you can track people in the United States, but I don't know that if they're going to use them or not, because they seem like something, like I think the Biden administration is going to have a hard time balancing between the people in their administration that are really liberal, progressive, who want to say, come on in. And then the people that are like, whoa, wait a second, we can't have everybody, you know? And I've been like, this is my personal opinion, but I've been a little bit surprised at what our new head of Homeland Security has said, because he doesn't sound very tough. He says, just wait, you know, don't come right now, but just wait. I want to give you access to asylum. If I were in Central America after the hurricanes, COVID, poverty, you know, I would just start running right now. That's what I would do. And so I think there might be a crisis on the border if they don't talk a little tougher. And so in some ways, okay, this is one issue, for example, if you're Lopez Obrador, it might have been bad in some ways, like he got criticism from human rights groups, and maybe he didn't, you know, maybe you think that that wasn't a great thing that he did to agree with Trump and to use the National Guard to kind of stop the immigration. But on the other hand, at least he knew what to do. And at least he knew that hordes and hordes and hordes of people were maybe going to stop coming to Mexico on their way to the United States. Whereas now, maybe he's a little bit worried, like, gosh, if they keep being so nice, maybe like more and more people are going to come in my country. And maybe we Mexicans don't want to be overrun with immigration either. So, I can kind of see from a Mexican perspective, both sides of the issue on that. That's hard. I mean, immigration is always hard.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Claire. Daphne Alicia also wants to participate.
Yeah, thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the time and for the great talk you have given us. And my question is, do you think that the U.S.-Mexico relationship will benefit in the near future thanks to the fact that Joe Biden won the election? And also, do you think that with the new U.S. administrations, the issues of security, migration, and organized crime can really be handled in a more efficient way?
Well, I mean, you had an administration similar to the Biden administration when you had Obama. And were those issues totally addressed? I mean, there was a crisis of children in the border in 2014. And some of the issues are just, I think they're not really in our control. You know what I mean? Like the drug cartels are doing what they will, and they're moving faster than any government, right? So I think I feel good that you have professionals in charge, and I also feel good that a lot of the sounds boring, right? But a lot of the mechanisms that had been there under Bush, under Obama are back. Like they promised, Lopez Obrador agreed to have a high-level economic dialogue with the United States to kind of handle issues of, borders, modernization, workforce development, job creation. So that's going to be chaired probably by your economic minister or maybe your finance minister, or maybe even, in our country, it might be the vice president, I don't know, but it's very high level. And the other thing that's going to come back is probably a high level security group and a high level group on the border. So you need to have people that are actually professionals and actually do these things for a living. In the last administration, what happened was it became through Jared Kushner and Vidigaray being friends, they would call each other up, and then they wouldn't even inform the U.S. ambassador sometimes that they were doing stuff. And so that's just, like in a relationship as complicated as the United States and Mexico, I would think that you would want to have like a clear channels of communication and clear ways to dialogue. So I'm hopeful that yes, that they handled Monday's meeting very well, and I think that the new Secretary of State knows Mexico, and the Secretary of Homeland Security is Latino. He speaks Spanish. He's seems like a good person. So I think, having professionals there is always better than winging it, right? So I think yes, it should get better.
Thank you very much, Claire. So anyone else would like to make a question to our guest? No, well, I have a question. I am the moderator. I'm going to use the privilege to make a question. Maybe someone else want to do it after me. But Claire, everyone knows now, I think in this room, that Mexican President López Obrador requested to President Biden to share vaccines with Mexico. Well, given the interdependence that exists between our two countries, it's not entirely irrational for the US to share vaccines. What I want you to explain those and to give some guides about how the government, the Congress works in this topic. So if the executive power in the US denies this kind of cooperation, what are the chances for other countries, or what are the role of the American Congress to do something about it? Do you think that the Congress, or how the Congress can do something about establishing cooperations to share vaccines with other countries, especially with a country that is on the interest of the US, like Mexico?
Yep. I am not an expert, I'm just going to say, on health issues, but I think, you know, they have an HHS rep at the US Embassy in Mexico, and they have a high-level meeting like every week on health issues and coordination. So I think if any country in Latin America is likely to get excess vaccines, it would be Mexico, I would assume. I think that right now, the hard thing is that we're not quite at excess vaccines yet. You know, like in the US, like we're not, we don't have enough vaccines. It seems like we're still like, we don't have enough vaccine. But I mean, at least the Biden administration, I think they pledged several billion towards the COVAX, and they're rejoining the WHO, and they're doing that kind of thing. But I wouldn't be able to tell you, Congress can appropriate money. Congress can put extra money for vaccine distribution if they want to in the Foreign Assistance Act, I think. I just think it's going to be, I think Mexico's actually done fairly well compared to other countries in making sure they're purchasing enough vaccines. And I actually don't know, but if your military is going to be the one vaccinating people, that doesn't sound like a bad idea either, to get out and to get the access. I think that, you know, like one proposal I've heard is that like, well, who's going to vaccinate like the Venezuelan migrants? Now that might be something that the US Congress, because there's people who care very passionately about Venezuelans, and there's 5 million Venezuelans all over Latin America, or 4 million all over Latin America. And should Mexico have to pay to vaccinate a Venezuelan who's living there? That doesn't seem like something that maybe we could, there's been proposals people have discussed. That's kind of a more radical one. Like, hey, you know, we need to show that we care about Venezuelans as well, and we're not hosting as many. So maybe we could pay for the vaccine if other countries are not wanting to have to do that. Because Colombia has like 2 million Venezuelans. That's crazy to have to vaccinate all those people. So that might be more likely. I think that, you know, Chile's done a very good job so far, but other countries have done much worse. So I think Mexico, once you get going, will probably be in the better performing part. That's a huge issue though of interest. I don't know. I mean, Brazil usually does well, they said, in vaccine distribution, and now they're doing terribly. So who knows what's going on in some of the countries, but yeah.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Well, we have 7 minutes left. Does anyone have a question? Arturo? No? Yeah.
Sure.
Can you help us? Yeah, okay. And then Paulina.
So who goes now?
You go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much, Claire. It was great. It shows you're on top of things, as usual. Okay. Always. You're up to the minute. That was great. Yep. Let me ask you about a couple of things that you mentioned. You said that the Trump administration was, and I quote you, an aberration from the norm, which is not explicitly a bad thing, but I think implicitly it is. So what do you think the US people, the US political system, can do to prevent another aberration from taking place?
Okay.
That's one question, and I have another one. Yeah,
okay.
You also mentioned that the Merida Initiative is in flux right now, right?
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen to it?
Okay. So the first one, that's like kind of what a lot of people are talking about, and you probably read the same things I do, but I read like the need for like a whole new civics education in the United, like let's redo history. Let's really learn it from like a diversity, tolerance type perspective. So some of that, I think making sure that voting rights are not cut off, because in many states, they're moving to restrict the vote even more. So they need to really make sure that voting. And then I think also it's going to be hard because the country's so polarized that I think that it's difficult to move forward. But they have to find a way to govern in a way that helps people, and that people can see that you know, they're moving forward with the because with the Democrats,
right,
even if it's narrow, people are going to blame them if things aren't passed. The president and the two houses are controlled by the same party, so they need to do something and get something done, and that may take some compromise, which will be tough because even the Democrats are really divided. And then the second thing was the Merida Initiative. I think the Merida Initiative has kind of been on autopilot the last couple of years anyway, because nobody. I mean, when I called them, they would say, well, we don't know what the Lopez Obrador administration really wants, but so nobody's objecting. So we're just keeping going with what we've been doing. But, you know, in some ways, the people that are in the National Security Council now were in it's like the same people, but just grown up. You know, they like waited 4 years, come back for 4 years. So I think it might go a lot back to the 4 pillars that you saw under the Obama administration. If Lopez Obrador wants that, or at least if he doesn't care if he has that, you know, like if it doesn't bother him, if it's not, if the U.S. presence is not anathema to what, you know, he wants to do. And some people have said maybe also like once his election is over, and if he does really well in the midterms, if Lopez Obrador does really well, then he'll be less nationalistic too. Like he'll be like, okay, that's over. I'm in charge. So like now we can work a little bit with the gringos, you know, like, so I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And now, Paulina.
Oh yeah, thank you, Claire. Your presentation was amazing. You're very nice.
Oh, thanks.
My question is that I was surprised when Biden announced the 100 days without deportations. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think about that? You think that we can expect a much softer immigration politics?
Yeah, I don't know. That kind of surprised me too. Maybe they're concerned too with the pandemic and everything, that like there have been people who were deported back under the other administration that had COVID and stuff. So maybe it's just a pause to kind of review what everything's going on. But I think immigration is going to be a really tough one, because a lot of the people that work in those agencies, like the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and in the like they do the removal, the deportations, and the people who work along the Border Patrol, they love Trump. They love Trump. So I think that it's going to be difficult to get them to implement a soft immigration policy. I really think that'll be very interesting, is to follow what happens with the Department of Homeland Security, because I don't know that, I mean, even the people that I know that voted for Biden, they're not like, let's come on in, Central America. You know, like they don't want that either. So I'm not sure who, anyway, I am more cautious than I think they're being on immigration, but you know, maybe they know something that I don't. And I think what it has shown is that with the Congress, with the U.S. Congress, either unwilling or unable to pass an immigration reform, then you do a lot by executive action. When you're president, you have a lot of power, and when you're head of DHS and stuff. So if you want to do an executive action on a particular thing, you can have that power for 4 years, but then it's difficult. Like if you guys have friends in the United States who have DACA, that was an executive action. And the hard thing is, if you set up something great like that program, what if a child was in high school, they got into college, and then the DACA was taken away from them, you know, and they were removed back to a country that they hadn't been in since they were So executive action seems like very powerful because you can do something as president right away, but the danger of that is that it can be undone. And so I hope that he's able to get some stuff through Congress, because honestly, I thought that if Obama had done immigration before healthcare, that might have been a better, I mean, that's just an observer, back when he had the majority. Push it through. But, right now they're just trying to get a COVID relief bill. And even that is proving difficult. So sometimes I think it's going to be interesting to see how they manage the coalition they have, which is a very, very diverse Democrat coalition. And same thing with the Republicans. It's very divided between the people that voted for the impeachment, or even Mitch McConnell, and then the people that went to the convention last weekend and love President Trump. That's a very that's a crazy mix of people too. So I think that hopefully it'll calm down in our country, and hopefully, I think President Biden, although he seems, he wasn't the most many people at first were like, oh, he's so old and everything. I kind of think that's what we need right now. It's just like a calm, predictable U.S. administration to deal with things as they come with professionals. And it's very refreshing to have press briefings with a press person who knows all this stuff, who's really sharp. And so for us, I'm just proud that we're kind of back as a government, back as a professional government. But anyway, I think my kids are going crazy, so I'm really sorry if they're loud in the background, but I might need to go pretty soon.
No problem. Thank you very much, Claire. Now, a person that you might know wants to make you a question. Professor Jorge Chabat, please.
Oh, hi, Jorge.
Oh, hi, Claire. How are you? Nice to see you.
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah,
good to see you too.
I'm, surviving the pandemic. But, well, I just have a question. What about the public opinion in the U.S. about Mexicans? If during the Trump administration, many anti-Mexican voices were very public, and Mexicans were stigmatized, and what was kind of contradiction, because at the same time the relationship between Trump and López Obrador was very good. So now it seems that we have a little bit the opposite. We have a new administration, probably with a different rhetorics about Mexicans, but maybe in some parts of the Democratic Party, they don't feel very well with López Obrador because of the closeness to Donald Trump. How do you think the American public opinion will see the Mexicans right now? Because the Trumpists don't like Mexicans in general, don't like Mexican blacks. Anyway, all kind of different races. And how do you see the environment in the public opinion now in the new administration? I mean, not only coming from the government, but from the public in the streets. So, do you think that that climate, anti-Mexican climate, will change a little bit, or how do you see that?
Okay, I don't think there's a generalized anti-Mexican climate in the United States. I think it was broader than that. Like you said, it was like anybody who's an immigrant, anti-Asian because of the pandemic coming from China, anti-Muslim, anti-Black, everything. I think people separate out the president of Mexico with the Mexican people. And I don't think the average US person knows enough to even know what López Obrador is doing in his own country. I don't think we're not that bright either. I think in general, people think of Mexico and they think of, they think of the good things about Mexico. The people are so hospitable, and the tourism and the food and the music, and I don't think it's a negative perception. I think the people that are going to feel these negative things are our elites, right? Our elites who might have negative business interests. Maybe they don't like that López Obrador stopped their brewery from being built or their gas pipeline from being sent.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a lingering negativity, hopefully.
Well,
I think that there, I mean, I think there's a lot of Americans, though, that do have those thoughts and those feelings, you know, and so I mean, but they're anti a lot of people, not just Mexicans.
oh, well, that's good to know that. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's scary. It's frightening.
Yeah.
It's frightening to me. But you know, I think we just didn't know how many of them there were. I don't think in our country.
Yeah.
What?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Last question, Claire. Professor Marcela Lopez Vallejo is going to make a question, but I would like to ask you if you can finish after you answer Marcela's question with a recommendation to our students who wants to pursue a career similar like yours, if they want to work like making this strategic report for congressmen and congresswomen. If you give them a suggestion for their career, that would be appreciated. We finish with that. Marcela.
Thank you, Claire. Just a brief question on you underscored 5 priorities of Biden, being one, climate change, and we cannot discuss climate change without energy. So I don't know if you know if that topic would hurt the U.S. Mexico relationship, or it really doesn't matter, you know, for the U.S. For Mexico, is very important because of the last 3 weeks Texas issue.
Yes.
But I don't know if how important is the U.S.-Mexico relationship on that area, being very important with Canada, but I don't know if with Mexico.
Yeah. I think the interest is that actually Mexico has about 25% of your electricity is produced by renewables and stuff. So the thing we don't understand is, like, you have so much great stuff, great potential, right? So why would your president want to build a coal-fired refinery? Like, it just doesn't make sense. It just seems like he's like making, in some ways, like ours, make Mexico in the 1970s again, you know? And that doesn't make any sense to us, because we're like, whoa. I mean, and the problem in Texas caused a problem for northern Mexico, but Texas, again, was a lack of regulation and a lack of, they don't use renewable, you know what I mean? So I think Lopez Obrador was able to use that as a reason why he wanted to have hydrocarbons from Mexico instead of relying on the gas from Texas. But anyway, I think that it will be only an issue in terms of if Lopez Obrador wants U.S. assistance in those kinds of, what they're doing now is the forestry stuff, you know, Sembrando Vida, that the idea of planting trees. It sounds weird, but actually the U.S. Forest Service helps Mexico with forest conservation. And there's a Mayan bioreserve in Guatemala, Mexico, Belize area. So we can keep going on those kinds of things with Mexico, with Lopez Obrador's blessing. He likes that stuff. So even if you don't like some climate issues, you might be able to work on others maybe. And it's not a lot of money. It's some money. It's maybe 10 million a year that we give to Mexico for climate issues. But I don't think it'll be like a negative. I think if it's a negative thing, it would only be if a US company is angry because they had won what do you call them? Like a bidding round. They had won to produce electricity in Mexico, and then something happens and now they can't do it. They can't do the wind farm. They can't do the solar farm. That's a business dispute, right? That the trade agreement might cause like a dispute, but I don't cover that. So I don't know how they do that or how hopefully they can fix it. Hopefully they can resolve the issue. And then did you have and then the last question I would say is, like, for you guys, I mean, for students, you guys all seem to have fabulous English, like much better than my Spanish. So, but I would just try to get any opportunity you have to do like a short-term Fulbright or an intercambio. I know that's hard right now with the pandemic, with COVID, but there's a lot of opportunities for you to do like short-term trips to other countries, whether it's, and maybe be creative. I mean, some of the students I met in Mexico, in Tijuana last year, were thinking of Asia. You know, it doesn't have to be the United States that you're pivoting to. Like there's going to be a need for people in Mexico to to speak all kinds of languages and to work in all kinds of parts of the world. And I think maybe if there aren't think tanks for the government that are nonpartisan, places like Mexico Evalúa or think tanks like that, you have a lot of think tanks in Mexico and a lot of nonprofit organizations that maybe you can do an internship with even virtually over the summer. And I always tell students in the United States that if you need to make money, if you need to work, like that's fine. I mean, if you, I worked in summers in college. So if you can only do the pasantía 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, like part-time, you know, and then the rest of it, you do whatever you do to make money. That's okay, you know, just to get experience. Also to approach a professor that you find interesting and say, Dr. Lopez Vallejo, like I understand that you're researching for a book. Do you need any help in research on you know, this issue? And if you're a really good researcher, then maybe in the future she would want to, you know, use you as somebody that, you know, she gives credit to in a footnote, or she even wants to do in graduate school, like a joint paper with, you know, like a joint research project or something. So yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, finding creative ways not to go into debt for your education, but to get, you know, experiences where you can work with nonprofits or work in another country is a good opportunity. Yeah, and that's all I have. But it was so nice to meet you guys, and I hope we can be in touch. And I will send Miguel the website because all of our reports are public now. So if you're doing a topic like on Korea, or you get a paper that you have to do on Burma, the coup in Burma, and you don't know what that is, you don't even know where Burma is located, right, in the world, you can go get it on this website, and it'll give you a very simple, maybe 2-pager on what that topic is. And I would encourage you to kind of use it. I mean, it's in English, but you can, you know, switch it into Spanish and sort of use it as a first place to go for information. Because CRS, most of the staffers in the Congress are just in their 20s, they're young. So we write to people who are young, and it's not too hard to understand. So I would use that. I'll send it to you in email.
Thank you very much.
I'm not happy to be in touch. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you to everyone who attended this opening lecture. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.